on Zoom, but in future we may change to some other channel. So today's topic is COVID-19 in pediatrics, family practice, and unusual presentation. This word unusual is very important for a general practitioner. ICU treatment or the approach is rather different. So we have eminent speakers like Dr. Vinny Hutwani, Dr. Pritha Joshi, and Dr. Priti Panchal are on the new speakers. Taking no more time, I request Dr. Neeta, our one of the KMA scientific secretary, for further proceedings. Dr. Neeta.
Thank you, sir. And hello, dear colleagues. On behalf of Scientific Committee, a warm welcome to all of you. And it has been a long time we haven't met for clinical meetings since our annual conference. And today we are here with practical tips about COVID, which we are all concerned about. And we have, as sir said, we have three eminent speakers with us. And let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Pritha Joshi. Dr. Pritha Joshi is a consultant neonatologist, pediatrician, and cardiac intensivist. She is in charge of ICU and NICU at Kokilaben Hospital. Dr. Pritha has done her fellowship in neonatal, pediatric, and cardiac intensive care and critical care transport from Australia and Canada for 7 years. She's trained in clinical research, functional echo, and ECMO. She's trained in renal replacement therapy, post-operative care of renal, liver, cardiac, and lung transplant patients. She's an executive board member of IAP, and she's a chairperson of intensive care chapter of Mumbai IAP. Over to Dr. Pritha Joshi. Very warm welcome to you.
Hi, Neeta. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Since Dr. Pritha, we are all really worried about the COVID. It's a new disease, it's a new virus, and most of us don't know how the infection is going to present to us. And moreover, the guidelines are almost every alternate day. So I have a few questions on behalf of KMA. So tell me, my first question is, what are the likely unusual presenting features of COVID-19 in the OPD practice in children, apart from our usual symptoms of fever, cold, sore throat?
Right.
Also, a management protocol in brief.
Yeah. So the first thing, the symptoms, like you mentioned, yes, 90 to 95% of the times it's going to be upper respiratory, starting off with upper respiratory, or sometimes only a solitary fever. So it could be solitary fever, which is high grade fever, like around 102, 103. We've got patients with that kind of history also. We've also have had patients with fever, which is mild, but diarrhea and gastrointestinal symptoms. So typical viral prodrome is how it starts, a child being also lethargic and refusing feed. So for the smaller kids, it would be a mild to moderate fever with refusal of feeds also. So that would be the general spectrum of symptoms. Now, for children who have other comorbidities, like who are asthmatics or nephrotic syndrome, etc., these kids could progress very quickly into a shock kind of syndrome. So they would start with a fever and then go into an inflammatory syndrome phase, which is being increasingly identified in children since the last 2 months. I will present a slide on that. It's called MIS, which is multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So I will just show it right now. Before that, I wanted to just say that thankfully, I mean, God has been great that, children have been kept safe. As you know from most of the reports, very few children. And one of the reasons for that is children are probably not able to mount that cytokine storm that you generally see in the adults, which is actually worsening the illness. That is one. Second, maybe BCG has some, protective feature there, because the children have just been recently immunized. And the third factor is that the angiotensin receptors, which are the main receptors for the coronavirus, when it attacks you, is also not very well expressed in children. These are few of the theories why, but God only knows his ways. Maybe because children have not lived enough. Okay, so that is why probably this less in children. I would just quickly, since we are talking, say about one of the biggest studies which came from China, which looked at 2,143 children who came COVID positive, of which around 4.4% were asymptomatic in that study. We are seeing higher numbers here now, which are asymptomatic. Around 50% had mild disease, and only around 5.8% of them had critical illness. And in that, most of them were less than 1 year of age. So the critical age is somewhere around 1 year of age. It seems to be protected, not causing so many symptoms after that. Like I mentioned, because we are dealing with children, we'll have to remember this kind of algorithm or tachypnea based thing, because many of these children will just present, as even in adults, you have the happy hypoxics, who just have tachypnea, not really significant respiratory distress. So tachypnea is something to watch, and therefore I put this chart, because it varies based on the age. So it's good to remember that. Now, this is the syndrome I was talking about. This is becoming increasingly reported. It was first reported from Europe, also from the US recently. And what particularly happens in this is the child presents with persistent fever, has elevated inflammatory markers. And when I say that, it's like CRP, Procal. We are also doing ferritin, and we are also doing IL-6 levels. Okay, so most of the units have started the IL-6 levels now to diagnose the cytokine storm. They typically have neutrophilia and lymphopenia, as already been described, and also signs of coagulopathy. And they present in all these varied things. They present with fever, and then suddenly they go into a shock, vasodilatory shock, sometimes a cardiogenic shock. Sometimes they present completely like a Kawasaki disease. So it can, and to look at coronary dilatation and aneurysm, etc. So this has become very my in children. So one of the
मेरी भी मर्जी नहीं मन करता नहीं मीठा खा सकती है ना जब मैंने स्टीम किया हुआ खा सकती है पहले भी दिन में आलू का ही भाजी बनाती तो जाके तो वही खाना पड़ता है मैंने चलो क्या करें
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Aprita, you can continue.
Yeah, you can hear me. Okay. So, presentation slightly atypical in this form.
Rohit bhai, can you do the needful, please?
Yes, madam, carry on. I have done the needful. Madam, carry on. I have done the needful. Dr. Preeta?
Okay, yeah, I just mentioned that the last thing is the multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So other than the common viral prodrome and the viral symptoms, you can present also with this. So this is important to keep in mind. When you're seeing a child with fever and looking extremely sick, this could be early inflammatory syndrome. The management changes according to that. Now, the next thing Neeta asked me was the management protocols. So yes, there have been multiple protocols, and they have been changing over the last few days and weeks. So to come to basically what we are kind of following, this is from the NHS group, but this is sort of, I'll just go through it just to get a clear idea. Like if you are seeing an outpatient, if you are seeing an outpatient who is an otherwise healthy child with suspected COVID, can you all see the chart well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're awaiting COVID results, which is what probably will happen even if you refer a child, initially it will anyway be only supportive care. Okay, so children, we are not, if they are suspected or if they are in contact with another person who's COVID positive, we are not starting them on any hydroxychloroquine as of now. If they are then confirmed, they again can continue as supportive care. Now this can be given at home. They can be isolated at home along with the other family member who might be positive. Second is a child who needs inpatient care, an uncomplicated illness, but the child is, slightly tachypneic, may need oxygen. In that case, again, till you await the COVID results, you start your supportive care. If need be, start with some oxygen by we do high flow nasal cannula, which seems to work very well with them. We always see to it that the child has a mask on the face, even when admitted. So again, that's protection for our healthcare workers. If confirmed, we continue the same care, but this child can be on the ward. Now comes the next case where you have an inpatient but has got higher, more clinical symptoms than the first case where I mentioned uncomplicated illness. Again, in this group, we continue with supportive care. This child can be observed on the ward or if need be in the ICU. Now coming to the more critical illness kind of symptoms where you have severe pneumonia, high requirement of oxygen, a child is going into ARDS or in shock, then of course the child would be either intubated and ventilated or will not be mechanically ventilated. In both cases, this child will get treatment in the form of remdesivir, and we may consider tocilizumab if we after we send the IL-6 levels and ferritin levels. So this is the classical algorithm. This is what I have made for our hospital. So this is what we are doing right now. This keeps changing, I must say, every few days. But however, right now, if we get a probable non-COVID referral who walks into the A&E, a child who comes in that case, if the child is stable or unstable, we still send a swab, because you never know whether the child is an asymptomatic carrier. So we send a swab. Until that period, we keep the child on the ward. If the child is more sick and unstable, we give stabilization care and start oxygen, sometimes even ventilate in the emergency room, and then from there shift the patient to the area where we can take care of the COVID if it's COVID positive. So this is how we have formed our algorithm, and we have a similar algorithm. This is the algorithm from the FOXY neonatology group for neonates who are born to mothers with COVID. But that I have not shown it in detail because I can explain that if there are questions on that.
Yeah. So, Pritha, this algorithm of the mother who's positive.
Right.
Mother who's positive and has just delivered a baby. So how do I counsel the mother about looking after the baby, about breastfeeding, and about the immunization?
So so for starting with at birth, right? If you're attending the delivery,
we are taking all the protective measures.
So obviously all the PPE, most important being the mask, the goggles and gloves. In addition to, many of the times we are wearing a cloth gown and on top of that wearing a plastic suit, because most, like I just mentioned in an earlier slide, thankfully there's been no vertical transmission significantly. There has been only a few neonates which have been reported, very, very few. And again, no transmission via breastfeeding from a COVID positive mother. So what we do is two scenarios. One is the mother is very sick. So if the mother is sick and needs ICU care after delivery, yes, then the baby comes into an isolated spot in the neonatal ICU. And then we start training a family member, because if the mother is very sick, she might not go home immediately. So we start training a family member who's a healthy contact to look after the child and then discharge the child. The second scenario is the mother is asymptomatic and just being detected as COVID. In that scenario, we do not separate the mother and the baby, obviously. In that case, a mother will wear a mask and take all the hygienic precautions, clean the breast, etc., and then start feeding the baby, but not separated at all. In fact, even immediately after birth, we allow them to have the skin-to-skin contact also. Now, if the third scenario, if the baby develops any symptoms, so the protocol is as soon as a baby is born from a mother who's COVID positive, the day one swab is sent. COVID swab is sent of the baby on day one. In the meanwhile, if the baby's symptoms develop in any form, usually in the form of some respiratory distress, etc., then of course baby will be isolated and taken care of in the NICU.
And what about immunization advice, Preeta?
So no real change. The baby will be immunized and sent. But if there are children who need, you're talking about pediatrics in general.
Yes.
Yeah. So immunization as of now, to complete everything up to 9 months, exactly on based by the on our universal schedule. But after 9 months, the 1 year and the 2 years and the 1.5 years can be postponed a month or so here and there, depending on what's the scenario. But we are not postponing any immunizations up to 1 year if possible.
Okay. So this baby can continue with routine immunizations, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So now my third question to you is, Preeta, what care should be taken in general OPD while we are treating children for doctor as well as our staff?
Right. So some of the things that we've put in place, I will explain, is that we are allowing only one attendant to come with the child as much as possible. And it's almost in all cases nowadays since the last week. Just the one mother comes in with the child or the father and not the entire family. First thing. Second is before they come into the floor where where we are doing our pediatric clinics, at the door itself, at the entry, we are asking very clearly for symptoms from the family. So having somebody at the front desk or somewhere in the clinic also to just be sure that nobody in the family is sick is very important. And asking for specific symptoms in the child before coming in so that the extra care can be taken if required. Like if the child has a high fever, has respiratory symptoms, then yes, we are not seeing them in the normal area. We will keep a separate area, which is the isolation area, again with a table and a OPD format, where we will see the patient. The doctor wears the gloves, the mask and the visor. So that is safe because many of the children might just cough on you and you can't help it. If you're as much as possible avoid throat examination. So giving symptomatic treatment based on what the mother is telling about is better than actually doing procedures which are aerosolizing. So avoiding all these things and not having too many people in your room also, other than just one person in the room. Similar thing for delivery, not too many staff required at all these procedures.
Yeah. Okay. So now we see so many adult patients, more and more number of patients are contracting COVID-19 and more number of parents are coming positive. So we have been seeing the whole family being affected COVID positive and including the child. So both parents, the grandparents, everyone in one family getting affected, and these number of cases, like this type of cases are more and more in the OPD now.
Yeah.
I have few questions about this type of scenario where both parents are COVID positive, the family members are COVID positive. Now, my question would be, if the child is symptomatic or asymptomatic, should we also test the child? Number two, what advice should be given to the parents of this child? So how do I counsel these parents about the baby and the parents who are hospitalized and no one to look after the child? So can this child stay in the hospital, or they have to find some relative, which is very difficult because nobody would be ready to take care of the child because they would also be scared. So I would want some clarification on this.
Yeah, so the first situation where the mother, so the parents are, parents are positive and what to do with the testing of the child. So in that case, there is no rule to mandatorily do a test on the child. You assume that the child is positive and observe for symptoms. Most important is observing for symptoms. If something is coming up in the child, yeah, then of course the child will also get tested, but till then will be assumed being in close proximity that the child is positive. So self-quarantining and isolating all of the family members is most important. The ones who are positive, try and keep a distance from the child if that is possible. But now in nuclear families may not be possible. So we just thank the progress, as in the children are not getting very much affected. So hope that happens. Second thing, if the parents need to go away and there's no relative, I think 100% the child needs to get admitted in a holding area in a hospital, because there's no other way, because parents are admitted and it's not safe, and I'm sure no relative or friend will volunteer to keep the child.
So, see, only the problem is we say quarantine or stay away from the child, but it's absolutely impractical for the mother to stay away from the child.
True.
Using a mask should be enough.
Yeah, so using a mask, using a lot of hand hygiene, cleaning all the surfaces that the patient, the so-called patient, is touching. And that kind of care is the best we can give.
Yeah. So the last one, Dr. Preetha, about how do you have been managing COVID patients in Kokilaben Hospital, and can you please share your experience about managing pediatric patients?
So one is that, like I mentioned, we have made that protocol, so it's very clear right at the level of the emergency when the patient comes in. OPD, as I mentioned, we are taking that care. There is an initial history taker, and then the patient is sent accordingly to the area where they need to be examined. And after they are examined in that area is immediately cleaned with hypochlorite. The desk, the chair, everything is clean. The stethoscope, everything is separate. Then coming to the ones who are admitted, so we're getting patients who are, we're getting a lot more suspects than actual confirmed cases.
Yes.
So right now what we are finding is, because we were initially sending every single suspect case to Vadia, and then we followed up with Vadia after a month, they had almost no positives in all the suspects that we had sent to them, and the same was being reported by most of the other hospitals. But now that we are finding children who have other comorbidities being a little more sicker. So we had a child who came in, a 14-year-old, I think from Malad area only, who came in, and she actually had diabetic ketoacidosis. So as per the protocol, we did the COVID, because every admitted child or a patient gets a COVID, and she came out to be COVID positive. By then, for that matter, we were wearing a regular PPE, but not the hazmat suit. So a lot of people in the ICU did get exposed. But this was right in the beginning, like in the first week of April. And then subsequently, she actually became a sicker DKA. So what we found was she probably had DKA and COVID at the same time, or COVID triggered the child to go into DKA. And therefore the child was much more sicker. She needed the ICU. Unusually, she needed fluid resuscitation quite a lot, even on day 3. And so probably she was going into that inflammatory syndrome, which I was talking about. So you see these kind of atypical presentations with a coincidental COVID positive. Again, we've had patients in the holding area who are not very sick. So high-grade fever, throat pain, and we had one pancreatitis who happened to be COVID positive. So we've had cases like that. But children have not been really very sick. We've had a lot more mothers who are positive, who, as again per protocol, close to delivery, we are doing everybody's COVID testing. And there are a lot of mothers who have, so far we've had 6 mothers who come COVID positive, but the first swab in the neonate is negative, and the neonates are doing well. The last one was discharged last week, so they're all doing well, right? Mother and child.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Preetha, on behalf of Kandivali Medical Association, for taking out time for us from your busy schedule. And Dr. Preetha was busy somewhere, and yeah, she wanted to exit. So you may do so. Thank you.
From anyone before I leave, because I think the subsequent speakers are adult speakers. So.
Yes, you want to be there?
No. If anybody has any questions as of now.
Yes. Yeah. So we take questions. There was somebody who had who asked on the chat box, saying that what are the presentation of COVID in neonates?
Yeah, so the neonatal presentations have again been an X-ray which is showing, so not typically on day 1, but day 3, day 4, the baby who's getting more tachypneic, needing oxygen, and then also needing CPAP. Very few have got ventilated for it. So neonatal things are mostly, symptoms are mostly respiratory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we have any more questions? Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prita. Thank you so much
For
for
having
joining us. Yeah.
me. Take care. Bye.
Bye. With this pediatric, I invite Dr. Amola to take over the proceedings.
Amola, unmute yourself.
Unmute. Unmute.
So, hi friends, it's a long time after scientific not met. I think we were practicing social distancing a bit too sincerely. Jokes apart, no, the COVID era just threw us off balance, and we were trying to understand this virus and also understand the government policies, and it took us some time to connect with you all. But we promise you, now we will be connected, and we have a lot of programs. If everybody is comfortable on this medium and platform, we would like to continue our KMA activities on this platform. I invite our speaker, Dr. Preeti Panchal. Dr. Preeti Panchal, hi ma'am. She is an ex-lecturer from Nair. She is an associate professor. She was ex-associate professor in ESIC hospital. She is at present managing COVID patients. She is attached to Tunga, Malad East, Malad West, and Sanjeevani Hospital, Malad East. She is the owner of Ishika Nursing Home, and she is also attached to Kairav and Asha Nursing Home. Welcome, madam. I also invite our next another speaker, Dr. Vinny Hotwani. Dr. Vinny, she is a physician practicing at Charco, and she's attached to Riddhi Vinayak Hospital, where she's managing a lot of COVID patients. She has a special interest in 2D echoes. She does 2D echo at Riddhi Vinayak and at Nidhi Hospital. Dr. Vinny Hotwani is our scientific secretary. I invite her also for this panel discussion. Can we start with the questionnaire, Dr. Preeti? In this COVID era, things have changed. No longer a patient walks into your OPD and comes in for consultation. So, what is the way you manage a patient on the OPD basis? Phone consultations, video consultations? No, madam, your voice is not heard. No, I cannot hear you, madam. Dr. Rohit?
Madam, can you turn on your device audio?
Hello, can you hear?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
In the OPD, what happens generally is that we take a prior appointment. With that, we then generally ask them what are their complaints. If it's very mild and asymptomatic patients, then generally we try and do the audio or video telephonic consultation. But on the history, we find the history fever is going on for more than 3 to 4 days, and all patient is having little breathlessness with cough and all, where we really need little physical examinations and investigations. So those patients, we call them for OPD with prior blood investigation if possible. so that they don't have to come for a repeated follow-up in the hospital. So only one visit prior to they come down. Generally, we give the list of investigations only on the basis of clinical complaints. So those who are symptomatic with a fever for more than 3 to 4 days, breathless, patients are being called in the OPD.
What are the other common symptoms and other uncommon symptoms that you have seen?
Generally, in the adult with the COVID, generally what we normally get is fever, breathlessness, dry cough, routine sore throat and all. But normally, unusual presentation, patient do come with loose motion. Some people come with only with an abdominal pain, and we find pancreatitis, and we find the COVID positive. Elderly age group, where the patients are more than 65 years of age. Generally, they just come with weakness, easy fatiguability. They don't feel like eating, anorexia, and those patients generally be found COVID positive. Diabetic patients generally don't come with fever. Sometimes they just feel, uneasiness, or all of a sudden sugars are shooting up. They come with directly with the DKA. So those patients also we found when we do COVID is COVID positive. So these are the unusual presentation with the people who are diabetic, agedly, immunocompromised, patients already on chemotherapy or a malignancy disease, very vague symptoms. And generally now it is very difficult. We have reached a stage where very difficult to say that which symptom will be COVID and which will be non-COVID. So any symptoms can present with the COVID, but generally, normally it's more of a respiratory. And in adult, we found a lot of patients in my practice when I'm treating. I found a lot many coming with the stroke nowadays. All of a sudden, patient comes with a stroke. Patient is hypertensive, well controlled, no problem. Suddenly come with a stroke. One patient come directly with the pulmonary thromboembolism. So they're presenting within a directly even hypercoagulable state. And when we find there is no DVT, there is no venous thrombosis, and only directly pulmonary thromboembolism. So there is a little very different presentation what we are seeing in the COVID present right now.
Okay. Any symptoms which you see and you can say that, okay, definitely this is not COVID?
No. Now any symptoms can be COVID.
Any symptoms can be
so,
COVID.
Like you have to be prepared that anything can be COVID until proved otherwise. And sensitivity of the lab test is about 80%. So many a times when the patient is classically COVID symptoms with the respiratory involvement, everything X-ray showing a patch, we do get COVID negative, and sometimes we get positive at the end of 2 or 3 samples. We get positive. Initially, I've got one patient who got 3 samples were consecutive negative, and the 4th sample patient turned out to be positive. So it's not that the one sample is negative, it's negative. If the clinical is suspicious there, you have to treat like a COVID positive patient only.
Okay. Yeah, there is 30% false negatives.
False negative.
Yes.
So then we have to be very careful.
Yes. In unusual presentation, I was told even perforations, intestinal perforation patients. I'm an anesthetist and we come across intestinal perforations coming without any underlying cause. Intestinal perforation patients, it is just a small study by some surgeon, not proved. I mean, for actually proving it, you need a larger study. But this is like just a correlation found. Apparently, they have some vasculitis element which is causing perforation.
That is what now there is a hypercoagulation, there is a thrombosis, so there will be an ischemic area which may lead to perforation. We are getting even false positive for typhoid.IgM for entry. That when we do a fever profile, we are getting a false negative typhoid.IgM also. So that is also one of the reason. Maybe a vasculitis thrombosis can lead to a poor perfusion and a leak and a perforation. Can be one of the possibilities. Need a more study on that.
Recently, loss of smell and taste.
Yeah.
So that is been added.
Yeah, that is the first thing when the symptoms started. Other than the respiratory, first symptom which was to go was a loss of smell and taste. So many people, I've got one patient recently, no complaint, no fever, nothing, only the loss of smell and taste, and she turned out to be positive. So that is one of the big earlier sign which they say reported even before your respiratory symptoms stands. Many patients come only with the loss of smell and taste, but then patient has to be very, very precise in that, intelligent enough to pick it up.
Understand it. Yeah, true. Can I ask a next question to Dr. Vinny? Dr. Vinny?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I'm here.
Dr. Vinny, like we see, suppose a patient comes with cold, cough, fever since 2 days, and that patient comes to you, can you tell us how do you proceed in such a case?
See,
How
at
do
this time, yes, yeah. So at this time, definitely we will always suspect about COVID. So we will take a prior history of exposure, travel, somebody traveling outside and coming home. Patient, what is the age group of patient? Patient has comorbid conditions, especially diabetes, which I feel absolutely think which is non-diabetic patients are turning out to be positive with the becoming diabetic with the COVID results. So probably this coronavirus is causing inflammatory changes in the pancreas, which is presenting with the fresh diabetes. The number of cases of diabetes are going to increase at least during that stress, during that period of time when they have fever. Otherwise, only cough, cold, and fever, as we said, what are not the symptoms of this thing? I feel there is a lot of scare among the people about this corona. If the patient doesn't have fever and patient is taking extraordinary care about hygienic conditions, social distancing, and all those things. So probably sometimes people are washing their vegetables with detergents. They are using so much of hand sanitizer that smell itself is causing throat irritation. So when the patient says there is itchy throat, running nose, no fever, sneezing, I'll probably treat this more as an allergic thing, and probably they will not be COVID because they have really taken good hygienic care. Little amount of hypoxia because of those masks and all these things. If the pain is too much, too bad throat pain, which we used to get in swine flu, the absolutely reddish throat, probably this patient, other than paracetamol, otherwise any fever, the exit stage, when we are suspecting COVID, it will be basically a paracetamol till the time we get further investigation. Unless until patient has comorbid condition, that we should take good care of diabetes. Otherwise, I will give them a short course of azithromycin or augmentin amoxicillinic acid combination, antacids and paracetamol. We can wait, but again with the comorbid condition, we just cannot wait. So we will have to investigate those cases. Most important thing is breathlessness. With comorbid conditions, I would like to know what is the oxygen saturation. If the patient can visit me, it is always better. Temperature monitoring. If these two things patients can monitor at home, and they want to manage at home only because they're so much scared about having a COVID positive report with so many social things going on around it, then I can rely on patient. But otherwise, patient will need investigation, X-ray test, oxygen monitoring, temperature recording. If they can afford, they can understand. They should have their own thermometer and their own pulse oximeter.
So what investigations would you ask for in a suspected COVID patient coming to your clinic? What investigations? Blood investigation?
Okay. If it is suspected, if I'm strongly suspecting, CBC, creatinine, urine routine, electrolytes, X-ray test, and PCR for COVID-19. If I'm suspecting, if I'm not suspecting, probably with X-ray test also I can hold on. If the patient is maintaining good saturation, if I'm sure no, this doesn't seem to be COVID, not bad kind of COVID, especially young patients are there with all the things I said. So probably I may not go for COVID test also. With so many changing criteria kind of thing, unless until patient is really exposed, otherwise I will not go. Then additionally, if I feel the patient is going to come positive, I'll add ferritin, CRP, LDH, these three things. If patient is elderly, I'll add D-dimer also.
Which patients do you ask for an HRCT?
So if the COVID report usually comes in 24 hours, but sometimes it is 48 hours. The patient has come to me with high-grade fever, with high suspicion of COVID, little breathlessness, definitely HRCT. Because it will give me results within 1 hour. I'll be very sure about. And the HRCT later on, if combined with COVID test, the sensitivity increases up to 90%. But in case we do not have COVID test, then also the sensitivity of HRCT in initial 3-4 days will be around 85 to 86%. At least 84%, yeah.
Right. If HRCT is not available or it is not possible for the patient to go for HRCT, there is something like a 6-minute walk test. Could you elaborate on that? Dr. Preeti?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go
The
ahead.
6 minutes walk test is, generally what happens is that normally we take the pulse ox saturation at the rest. Then we tell the patient to just walk around with the normal speed, walk for 6 minutes, and we take a pulse ox saturation again at the end of 6 minutes. If there is a drop in oxygen saturation, which becomes approximately less than 90 to 90, that means that during an exertion the oxygen requirement is not being able to fulfill, means there is some amount of involvement of the lung, means patient needs an urgent evaluations and need a CT and X-ray chest, and probably in this scenario we will go ahead with the examination and test of the COVID. And generally, patients who are already admitted in the ward, and we need to know whether how much is the recovery thing, because we cannot keep doing the CT every time and X-ray. So patient generally normally ask us. So then we tell them, in the ward, just walk for 2, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. At the end of 6 minutes, if the saturation doesn't drop, means it's recovering. And also generally it is just a indirect parameter to know whether the patient is able to go exert or not. If we cannot, then it means that there is increase in the inflammation, and cytokine storm is likely to come up very soon if the patient is not able to walk even from the bed to the bathroom.
Oh, okay. And cytokine storm occurs after 7 days, right?
After 7 days.
No, 7 days.
After 7 days. After
Yeah.
7 days of the illness, it comes. Generally, what happens, patient come with a fever, and the patient generally fever subsides. And again, if the second spike of fever comes, or there is a continuous drop in the SpO2, the X-ray lesion starts deteriorating. Patient feels very breathless. Generally, patient says he feels very tired and so weak that he cannot even get up from the bed. For that basic turning, getting up, also he feels more exertion. That is a time when one should be. It's an alarming. Patient can go into cytokine storm. So that is a time we should. Normally we do IL-6 to look for it.
Okay, coming back to our OPD patient. Suppose you've suspected COVID and you have sent the test for RT-PCR. You have sent that test. Now, once the test report comes, how do you counsel the patient and the family?
Yeah. So generally what I do the day patient comes to me and we advise for a COVID test, that is a time only I start preparing them mentally, in advance only. Say this is what we are doing, and the COVID is not that dangerous the way it comes in a form of a mild and asymptomatic also. And generally when we start the treatment early, we take a proper care. Things are not that life dangerous thing. We have to keep monitoring. So like primary preparations, priming is already done the day we ask for a test. The day the test comes, if it comes positive, and then we have to look at what are the comorbid. If it's a young patient, generally we are not more worried. We can asymptomatic, we can always tell them to be doing the home isolation. If the patient is having a comorbid condition, patient is already diabetic, and X-ray is already showing the lesions, infiltration and pneumonic patch and all, means patient will require an hospitalization with the COVID positive, with the lung involvement, with the SpO2 which is low. So then we declare the report saying that your report has come positive, and because of this parameters, I would prefer that you come under observation and get admitted. We'll treat you. If the patient is mild, or a pre-symptomatic patients, in that case we tell them that your report has come positive, but you have no comorbidity. You are young enough. You can be very well managed on OPD basis. So there is nothing more to worry, and it is curable, and it has to be treated properly, and if proper care is being taken, nothing will happen to you and your family members, because they are more concerned is the family members also. So that is a generally time. And the day I advise a COVID test, same day I tell them that till the report comes, at least isolate yourself. Don't come in contact with the family members. If it's come positive, he has already started its isolation period, not after the report.
But in the meanwhile, do you give any treatment? Or
yeah, so, no, I give a symptomatic treatment, like the patient is having fever, so we give them paracetamol. I give them antibiotic, azithromycin or augmentin, and the cough syrup, a symptomatic treatment. If the patient is having a dry cough, the patient is having more of sore throat, then we give them betadine gargle or steam inhalation and stuff. So whatever the symptoms they come up with, we just try to give the symptomatic treatment, isolation, add with the vitamin supplement, drink plenty of water. So those basic protocol we normally keep, we tell them that till the report comes.
There's a little confusion between isolation and quarantine. Could you just tell the difference? I mean,
see, quarantine means a person has come in contact with the person who is already COVID positive or a suspect COVID. Suppose a patient comes to me with the complaint, so that means the person who has the symptoms and has an X-ray finding, that patient looks suspect. So their family members who are being kept inside the house, it means quarantine. That means you will remain inside the house with the restriction of movements outside, not come in contact with many people, and take caring of. With isolation means patient is suspected COVID or positive report COVID. So that person is completely isolated, and he or she will not come in contact with anybody. They will be confined to one room, will be wearing a mask continuously inside the house, having a separate washroom and things like that. So they will be completely isolated, out of touch with everybody. As far as the physical contact is concerned, not even keeping a distance of 3 feet and talking, and not for an isolated. Quarantine, they can move in the house with a distance of 3 meters and safe distance, and that is possible in quarantine. So that's a quarantine is for people who are coming in contact with the suspected. An isolation person who is already suffering.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Vinny, your views about HCQs? Dr. Vinny?
For prophylaxis, personally speaking, I have not taken it. Few of my friends, they have called me in earlier when they wanted to start practice, they wanted to take it, so they have taken it. If you ask me now, ICMR is planning to remove this from the protocol. This is not added in any of the protocols. But in case patient is suspected, patient comes with fever and chills, with no other focus as such, we do not examine the patient as we used to earlier. In those cases, in case you give HCQS and patient turns out to be malarial positive, it will be a good thing for them. Then you can adjust the dose as you give Larigo. Larigo DS is 500 milligram, HCQS you give is 400 milligram. You have to complete around 2.45 grams of chloroquine in 48 hours. So by the time the report comes, you will have the idea what it is. That can be done in case you have given. Otherwise, it is going to be out of protocol. The second reason for not giving it is addition of remdesivir, which is an antiviral, which is going to be added, will be easily available in the market soon. And another antiviral is favipiravir, which will be oral tablets. So probably they will not be very effective in patients who are already taken chloroquine. So if you are strongly suspecting it is COVID only, so then if in case the antiviral is used, because it is recommended, but we have not used it because it is not available in India easily, only on compassionate basis for few patients electively. There is a lot of hard work to get involved in it. So initial 5 days of illness of positive cases, you are supposed to give it. That is the only problem. So now HCQS is not in the protocol.
What about anticoagulants, antiplatelets? Do you advocate?
Yeah. So as I said, comorbid conditions are very important. In case the patient has turned positive, patient is symptomatic, then I advise them D-dimer. If the D-dimer level is high and still patient is stable, does not want to be in the hospital kind of, patient is maintaining saturation of 97, 98 with respiratory rate of 22, 24 kind of thing, I give them aspirin at least. But if the patient is admitted, patient is breathless, definitely. All the patients who are requiring high flow oxygen probably will be going for BiPAP continuously or prone position or ventilator, which we avoid most of the cases because the mortality rates are very high. In all those cases, definitely we give anticoagulants and the full dose of anticoagulants. If the borderline D-dimer is high, borderline like 500 to 1000 kind of thing, so then it goes like 0.4 ml OD, 0.4 ml BD or 0.6 ml BD. The dose is like that. And then anticoagulant, till the time the patient stays in hospital, we continue it. And nowadays, the recommendation is to continue it for 2 to 3 weeks also. Because they have high thrombotic tendencies, especially D-dimer has come high. So you have to continue it. The low molecular heparin, at least 0.6 ml OD, 0.4 ml OD, depending on the weight of patient and the comorbid condition risk factors, we do continue it. All patients who are cardiac, in which the COVID has not caused significant thrombocytopenia and all, we give, and they are already on antiplatelet agents, we continue it. Even if anticoagulant is added, we continue with the aspirin or clopidogrel, whatever is going on.
Okay. Now you have to decide, you feel the patient is deteriorating and the patient needs admission to hospital. So what are your criteria either you or Dr. Preeti can answer. What would be your criteria for admitting the patient to the hospital?
Okay.
Patient is in isolation at home. Now
Right.
you feel the patient is deteriorating. What is your criteria for admitting the patient to the hospital?
When the patient is being maintained on home oxygen or home quarantine treatment, we tell them to monitor SpO2 on a regular basis. If the SpO2 starts falling about, it becomes less than 92, 93, on supine, sitting position at rest, means it is worsening symptom wise. Patient fever is not coming under control. Patient becomes more tachypneic, breathless. Patient started having, if we do the blood parameters or repeat for them, if that shows deteriorations, in that case, it means when the SpO2 is falling, that is the easy marker on patient who was at home. Just check the SpO2, or clinically they say they are feeling very breathless. So when they feel very breathless, then I tell them to come back to the hospital and get hospitalized. We do the repeat X-rays and repeat the parameters of D-dimer and interleukin to see whether it is reason from the previous reports or not. Because generally they recommend to repeat at the end of 72 hours the repeat market, so they know whether they are in worsening state or a prophylactic. And once they get admitted, we generally do the ABG and SpO2, and then we see the PF ratio. If the PF ratio is less than 300, it means patient is likely to go into ER. It is already progressed to ERDS, then we have to be more vigorous and starting on NIV or something like
that. Okay. Dr. Vinny, there is a news, national,
National Early Warning Score.
Yeah, national.
So basically,
news score, that is.
Yeah.
So on that basis, so could you just tell us something about this news score?
See, basically, again, it is going to see your vitals. That's what I said. When first time when the patient comes to the OPD, especially with this rainy season, with the fever, because of this COVID, the things have not changed as such. But this news score is just to certify which patient is bad. So in this, we see the temperature, what is the respiratory rate, and what is the saturation, what is the blood pressure, what is the heart rate. All these 5 criteria you will be seeing, and then you will see what is the mental.
Dr. Vinny, your network is, can't hear you. Dr. Vinny?
Am I audible? Yeah, am I audible? Yeah, am I audible? Yeah. Yeah. So in depending on the score has like 1, 2, 3 kind of numbering, and when the score is high, you know the patient is going to deteriorate. Patient will require hospitalization and further line of treatment. One more thing I would like to add what Preeti said. We can tell asymptomatic patients to stay in hospital, but as Dr. Preeta said, they are happy hypoxic. So most of the patients, if you are not very sure how they will be able to manage things at home, especially saturation and respiratory rate and the breathlessness part, they just come and they are sitting. They just feel they are very fatigued, but actually they are very hypoxic. They do not have that much of alertness to understand that they are breathless. If I ask them on telephonic consultation or personally also, they will not agree to it. And when you see the saturation, I've seen saturation of 36% in the OPD patient is sitting absolutely like this. When you go and count their respiratory rate, then you see it is 40, 46. But non-complaining.
Dr. Vinny, your network is a problem.
So generally,
it is not like peripheral collapse, especially elderly.
I'll go on to Dr. Preeti. What is the treatment that you give?
Are you there?
Yeah, but your Vinny, your network is going off in between. Yeah, now better. Now better. Right. Please continue.
Yeah, sure.
So happy hypoxic. Can you just elaborate? It's a
no. It's basically the hypoxia is to the extent that their mental status is not that good to understand what is going on, and probably sometimes they forget their fever. Always we are insisting patient has high grade fever, but surprisingly after the patient gets hospitalized, the fever recording is not that much. Patient will say 8 दिन पहले बुखार आया था, 2 दिन पहले बुखार आया था. In those cases, when we say the cytokine storm occurs from 7th day onwards, so counting of 7 days becomes very difficult. When to watch? So we have to be very vigilant which patients can understand how bad they are. Otherwise, better to be check with their general practitioners or family physicians. Just go and get yourself checked, especially the saturation part. I feel saturation is something you don't have to wait for X-ray and all those things. The patient is COVID positive and saturation is deteriorating, the patient is going to be bad, and they really require high flow oxygen and with good amount of BiPAP. Early is better. Otherwise, they will deteriorate very fast.
Okay. Can you give us just in brief how do you treat the patients in the hospital as regards immunomodulators, antiviral?
Okay.
How do you treat the patient and anticoagulants? Those are the three headings under which you treat the patient.
Yeah.
So could you just give us in brief when and on basis of which investigation do you decide to start the treatment?
Yes. So basically, again, cytokine storm is a clinical diagnosis. We confirm it with the blood parameters. Yeah, IL-6 is the one that. So like LDH is going high, CRP is going high, ferritin is going high. All those things are going high, means patient is landing up into a cytokine storm. Patient can have hypertensive response or sometimes barely hypotension and bad diabetes. Sugars go really haywire. There are two reasons for it. Patients who are requiring high flow oxygen, hospitalization, we start with steroids, especially when the ferritin levels are very high. Normal ferritins are like less than 300, 400, we are not bothered. But when they are very high, steroids. At our place, we are starting with methylprednisolone, 40 milligram TDS, usually. But nowadays, there is recommendation of dexamethasone, which can be given again 4 milligram TDS. Whatever makes you comfortable, both are good. But methylprednisolone is one thing which we feel it is as a pulse therapy that works well. Second thing is you asked me about steroids. You can do calculate and depends how bad a patient is, how is the patient's oxygen saturation, how bad is the X-ray. So what I do is I normally just monitor on the saturation level. If the patient is doing good with the decrease in the respiratory rate, respiratory efforts, probably I'll do X-ray on second or third day, because in initial phases I'm not going to get very good X-rays. And if the X-ray remains bad, probably I'll continue steroids for 4 to 5 days in the same dose, and then on the oral dosage, depending on the saturation and X-ray findings. With the prone position, non-invasive ventilation, BiPAP, prone position, steam inhalation, breathing exercises if patient can do at that time also good, abdominal breathing, with all those things. First is steroids. Second is tocilizumab, which is the main drug. The patient has high-grade fever, cytokine storm, all features are there, and patient is not responding. We, as soon as the COVID test comes positive, we send their interleukin levels. In our hospital, normal recommendation is interleukin is around 7. If it is more than 20, we can give tocilizumab. Only problem with tocilizumab is you are not supposed to give in patients with active tuberculosis. Old tuberculosis also sometimes can reactivate it. Patient has low WBC count, less than 1,000. You have to reduce the dose to half. If the patient platelet count is less than 1 lakh, again you have to reduce the dose to half. So that this is an immunomodulator. The basic immunity should not be that low that patient will land up with other complications. But otherwise, it is a safe drug with mild to moderate renal dysfunction. You can give it. If the is not good, OT, PT, bilirubins are up to 3 times of normal, you have to reduce the dose to half. Otherwise, if it is less than that, you cannot give it. It means the bilirubin is 5 times the normal. So it's basically hepatically, it is not safe drug. But in COVID patients, we are getting more of renal involvement as compared to liver involvement as of now. So tocilizumab can be given. It is usually given in the dose of 8 milligram per kg body weight. And you can repeat it if the patient is showing good response after 12 to 24 hours, maximum up to 3 doses. Usually patients require 1 dose and they do 40 to 22 hours, the fever starts coming down very well, probably the effect of steroids and additional effect of tocilizumab. Antivirals, yes, it is recommended, but it is not available. I do not have any personal experience with remdesivir. People have used it, and the international levels, they have found good results in 40 to 50% of patients, but we do not know when will it be available, how effective it will be.
Dr. Preeti, any
See,
experience with remdesivir?
Remdesivir is not available, so we have not yet used it in Tungatlik so far. What we have used is tocilizumab, and I have used a ritonavir lopinavir combinations when we don't get any other thing. So that I have used it in the beginning when the patients are mild to moderate symptomatic patient in a dose of 200 by 50, two tablets twice daily, and that has shown a good result. And tocilizumab, when we give, generally I prime them with the steroid. Generally what happens when we give injection tocilizumab, as per the weight, generally they have a lot of reactions and uneasiness, and also generally prime with this steroid salmeterol, give the injections, and after that many people have this spike of fever and all, so you can just give paracetamol after that, so that the reactions and the symptoms what they feel after giving the injections are little lessened down. That is one thing. And remdesivir is, as usual, it's still not yet available to us for a free use, so we have not used it, or at least I have not used it. And as far as the giving the injection Clexane is as per the weight. If the patient is having the high D-dimer, I start with the Clexane 0.6 and then continue till the patient is in the hospital, and after the discharge I add with Ecosprin, or if possible, if there is somebody who can give injection, then I continue with injection, otherwise I give Ecosprin.
One more thing about Amala ma'am, one more. Oseltamivir, as people have doubt about whether we can use oseltamivir. So any patient coming with cough and bad throat, the patient is saying it's absolutely red. Yes, within 48 hours of the fever and cough symptoms, you should give it. When you send COVID report, in case the patient has H1N1 positive, they report it at the same time for the same throat step, so that you can continue it, and the effectivity will be there because it started within 48 hours. But otherwise, as far as COVID is concerned, it doesn't have any rule. You are not supposed to give it blankly for all patients with COVID kind of thing. So I think COVID people do not complain of throat pain that much, but the H1N1 people do complain of bad throat.
Okay, so that could be the distinction.
Yes.
Okay, and a little about the COVID awake repositioning protocol, the CARP. So how does proning help the patient? You have you found that proning the patient?
Yes. Proning is definitely. Proning is definitely helpful. The only problem happens with the patient with post bypass. They are not able to lie down. But yes, more the time they are able to lie down, their oxygen requirement is definitely less. And once you once you go through the ICU ward of all COVID patients, isolation ward, almost everybody is in a prone position, and after some time they will be
allowed. So how does it work? How does it work? How does proning work?
Actually, they have seen it. Probably the ventilation perfusion will be a better better way it is happening with the proning position. That must be the thing which is working. Because what we do is we give them high flow oxygen and proning position, and when the patient is sleeping supine or propped up position, then the flow of oxygen is less along with the BiPAP. In that way, patients are managing very well. Earlier, both the things are started, it is better. Steroids and oxygen and BiPAP and this proning position. These are the three things which are absolutely sure they will work. Rest of the things are still yes, no kind of thing. There are so many things that are added to it. Doxycycline not recommended now. Ivermectin, which was recommended, which is out now. The lopinavir, ritonavir was given earlier. Now we do not give it routinely, kind of. Chloroquine, it is out. So these are the 3-4 things which are must, which are needed, and they are effective. They are proven effective. Oxygen, steroid, oxygen.
At what SpO2?
Additionally, antibiotic.
At what SpO2 do you decide to intubate the patient?
Absolutely, patient is fatigued, just cannot breathe, then only. It's not a saturation. We have kept the patient with 76 saturation, 70 with 15-20 liters of oxygen, with BiPAP 28 settings, and we have not intubated.
See, then intubation, generally will not give more improvement. It's more of a prone position and NIV, which helps more better. If the patient is being kept in prone position for at least an hour, and then the patient is kept in the right lateral position, then the patient return to the left lateral position, and then a sitting position. So that is the way we keep the patient, and then again back to prone position. So moment we put the patient in a prone position, what happens is the tidal volume increases, and once the tidal volume increases, whatever the hypoxia is, that is being cleared off. With the PEEP and with the pressure effect. The perfusion is little better when we put in the any of the, even in the whether ARDS because of the COVID or non-COVID. Generally, the treatment of ARDS, it is recommended we put the patient in a prone position.
No, but
It's
other
irrespective whether
patients
it's a
with
COVID
bad,
or non-COVID.
yeah, but other patients with ARDS will not. In COVID, especially, as soon as you ventilate, push the patient, put the tube, the patient is going to like, it's like a,
Yeah, so
the
generally we
outcome
try
is going to
avoid
bad.
the-
Yeah. So
we
it's
avoid
like
the patient.
we are avoiding it. Yeah.
You avoid it.
Overall, 90% times the mortality is there. The success rate is hardly 10%. It's not like other cases of ARDS. Yeah.
Okay. When do you decide to do a 2D echo of those patients? Which, I mean, what is your criteria for doing 2D echo? Do you do for all patients admitted in hospitals in ICU, or you have some criteria for doing 2D echo? How many of myocarditis patients have you seen with COVID?
I haven't seen
Not-
any of the patient. Already the patient is dilated cardiomyopathy or patient is post bypass, whose previous reports are available, and if they have more of lung things, we do not do it. We are not doing COVID positive 2D echo unless until the report turns negative and the patient is shifted out of isolation ward. But otherwise, the way it was said outside, the myocarditis is very frequent. European
We have,
studies
I
and all,
haven't come
but
across.
even I haven't come across. There's no case kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Now you have given all this treatment, patient has improved. What is your discharge policy?
See,
On what
earlier,
criteria will you
It is
discharge the patient?
it depends. See, with the patient has come with the lung involvement, and if I see the X-rays clearing off, patient's oxygen saturation requirement is going down, and patient is now off oxygen, maintaining the saturation, and as almost 7 days of the illness is passed off. That means that 7 to 10 days is passed off. That means the chances of patient worsening is very less. And generally, at the end of second week of the illness, or by the towards second week, the virulence and the severity of illness also tends to go down. And clinically, if the patient has already shown us the response, and then we discharge the patient, let the patient be again in isolation for 1 week. So generally criteria before the discharge is the improvement in the symptoms for which the patient had come up with a normal SpO2, maintaining the oxygen at the room air temperature, and other comorbid, like if the patient is having a diabetic, it should be under control. If it's patient in hypertensive, any other comorbid conditions which is precipitate or which has come, the patient has come up with, should be cleared off. That is one thing. And the second thing, they say that you have to do the COVID and all, but now with the newer guidelines and things like that, we don't do repeat COVID before discharging the patient. So it was earlier, it was told to do repeat COVID, but now as per the new guidelines, we don't repeat COVID because it can remain in the blood positive for a little longer time. And they said if you give more steroids, the positivity remains for a little longer than expected than the patient who has given a less amount of steroid. So generally, patient shows clinical improvement with discharge, because we cannot keep the patient for 14 days till the disease period duration is over. So generally, we discharge and then we tell them to monitor at home the SpO2 and pulse, BP, and all those parameters. We teach them how to take it, and then they monitor at home. And if any worsening of the symptoms, they inform us back.
Is it possible that you discharge the patient within 7 to 10 days and the patient goes home and suddenly deteriorates?
Yeah, so that happens. And that is the only reason that the patient should be admitted with it. That's the reason I said the X-ray is clearing off. Patient's oxygen saturation should be maintained at room air. I keep for 24 hours with the room without oxygen at room air temperature. Patient is maintaining, then the chances are very less the patient will deteriorate. But if you tend to discharge the patient within 4-5 days, where the cytokine storm is likely to come after 7 days of illness and all. So too early discharge can, but if you generally discharge the end of 10 days of the illness, the chances of worsening and coming back is very less.
And at the time of discharge, what tests would you do? COVID, you said not required. Any other tests would you like to do before discharging?
Yeah, suppose when before discharge, when generally we do the CRP and D-dimer, other vendors, when we see that showing a decline in the CRP and D-dimer, that means patient is clinically improving, the parameters wise improvement, so that we can, on that basis, we can do the clinical judgment with the neutropenia, when the generally platelets are on lower side, try to comes up. Generally, the lymphocytes, the lymphopenia is that starts recovering, leukopenia starts recovering. So those are the other clinical parameters which are the indicator that patient may have a COVID, or starts showing an improvement, then we take a call on discharging. And then we tell the patients that at least keep monitoring all these parameters at home. We give them a chart bottle to monitor at home.
Okay. And
Ma'am,
yeah.
yeah,
And yes, Dr. Vinny.
no, the patient comes with acute myocardial infarction, no history of fever, no exposure, no travel history, and the patient comes out to be COVID positive. Patients, all parameters which we do normally with infarct, they are normal. Normally those patients are in the hospital for 5 days or so. COVID report has come positive. Patient has not developed any kind of fever in the 5 days of stay and previously at home also. And in those cases, it becomes very difficult to make them stay more in the hospital. But still, we should insist them to be there from 7 to 10 days. Because that is the time when we are worried about these patients, especially infarct patients, because they are already 60 plus people, usually diabetics. We must monitor from that 7 to 10 days because we do not have anything else to offer them. They usually maintain saturation very nicely, 97, 98. They absolutely do not have any symptoms of COVID. So actually, we do not know whether it was a natural myocardial infarction which was going to happen to this patient, or it was because of the COVID thrombotic tendency the patient has precipitated with it. The treatment part will not change unless until the patient develops fever, or the X-ray is normal, then patient will not require anything else also. But those 7 to 10 days, in those cases, all patients with CVE, all patients with infarct, which do not have any symptoms of COVID per se, COVID fever per se, they are not having at least 10 days of hospital stay. Other patients, we have to make them understand that 10 days is a minimum requirement for the hospital stay. Problem happening is during the discharge, relatives have different queries because we have different criteria for discharge. That as earlier it was negative report kind of thing. So now that is not the problem. The problem is the relatives say the society is asking for negative report. And then you have to make them understand what we are doing is we usually do on the 12th day. Because the cytokine storm is over, we expect that it should come negative. But surprisingly, on 12th day, all the reports are coming positive. But then patients' relatives are easily ready to stay till 3-4 more days. And then after 3 days, again they ask, what about the report? We have to tell them, if we do the report, if the report comes positive, whether you will be able to take them home. Then they say, no, we are okay without getting the reports done. And then they can be discharged if they are stable with whatever Preeti ma'am said.
Okay. So up to how long will the patient be infective? So how long should the family members be careful, and for how long will the patient be infective to the others around?
Generally, the infectivity, the duration is up to 14 days. They say that by the end of second weeks, the virulence and the infectivity generally goes down. So generally at the end of 14 days, the chances of the patient giving infection to the family members is less. But to be honest, there are certain cases where we do find it to extend to be positive for 21 days and 28 days. But by and large, end of second weeks, the virulence is less. So even the patient has completed 14 days, to be on a safer side, we tell them to extend it for another 1 week because we have not tested the patient COVID negative or positive. Sometimes it may remain positive for a longer time also. So then in that case, it is always after the discharge, tell them to be at least isolated for at least minimum 1 week to 10 days. So by and large, it is almost 3 weeks.
No, but usually after 12th day, 12th to 14th day,
it goes down. It goes down. It's almost gone at the end of 2 weeks.
Yeah. So basically after 12 to 14 days, even if the PCR is coming positive, it is kind of a dead RNA which is giving you positive results. It is not going to be infective, that has been told. But in case the patient wants to donate convalescent plasma, patient wants to go for the work, for fitness and all, at least 25 days, total 25 days of illness, we have to tell them to be alone or separate isolation, not to join the duty.
The moment we tell them now that no isolation, you are fine, so then they will demand that can we go for work and all. So it is better to keep them in isolation for at least another 1 week, at least over total 21 days, so that even though when they demand to go to work, at least it can be fulfilled. I tell them the virulence is not there, but it is better that you remain isolated. So both way things work, otherwise they'll start working.
Dr. Utpal is asking 25 days after discharge. No, it is not 25 days after discharge. It is total 25 days of illness.
Illness from the time it is started.
That started, yeah.
Could you elaborate a little on the plasma therapy you talked about? So are you doing it? Is it showing good response? Could you just elaborate, Dr. Vinny, Dr. Preeti?
Yeah. So, okay, basically it comes under ICMR guidelines. But as such, private hospital have not been given any approval. Only 1 or 2 hospitals which have been allowed, they are giving it. One more thing which is available, which we people are doing at Riddhi Vinayak, is what is known as plasmapheresis kind of thing. So what we do in dialysis patients, we use a filter for hemodialysis. In this, there is a different filter which is used, which is known as cytosorb filter. The filter is different. The cost of filter is, which lasts for maximum, usually 12 hours, but we extend it up to 24 hours sometimes. The cost of one filter is around 95,000. If the patient's cytokine count is very bad, not getting controlled with whatever facilities available, then that is the one other option which we give. So these are the things which are going on, but plasma therapy we have not given it because we have tried getting approval from the government authorities, but we were not allowed. So we have not used it.
From the COVID report, the viral load, can it be a predictive thing for the prognosis of the patient? The viral load that they say some CT cycle, they give the details. So would that CT cycle decide the prognosis of the patient?
I think it will decide more of infectivity of the person, how much it will be infected to others. Prognosis, I think somehow there is no rule for corona. Which day the fever started, when will the cytokine storm start? The cytokine storm is what? It's basically high-grade fever. So initially also there is one phase of cytokine storm when the patient has fever, but it's the milder form. The 7th to 12th day what we get is the severe form of it. So what you said, the quantitative report, viral load. So if the viral load is more, patient can deteriorate fast, especially with the comorbid conditions. But probably young people can have good amount of viral load and they might stay good with the good immunity and all those things. But yes, they will be more infective. If they meet more number of people, they will infect more number of people. Yeah.
Okay. What is the role of respiratory physiotherapy post-discharge?
Yeah, see, generally what happens is that because of the ARDS, there is always a stiffness in the lung. So there is always a breathing which is more, labored breathing and all. So generally we tell them to do more of a spirometry, the 3 balloon thing. So we keep them, that is increases the deep breathing, holding the breath and then expiration. So that will increase the tidal volume and the stuff. The patient will have a good amount of breathing exercises. Generally what they say that post ARDS, post infection, there is some amount of fibrosis which has happened, which will again lead to difficulty in breathing. So respiratory physiotherapy as early as we can introduce will be better, but generally we tell after this SpO2 things have settled down, because otherwise breath holding will be more difficult. But at least till the time they don't do that, at least we tell them to do a deep breathing exercises. Just take a deep breath, hold for a 30 seconds, few seconds, how much ever they can hold, and just release, so that they don't have to need of any other physiotherapist from outside or start. This is they can do it, those breathing exercise. That is a basically start when the patient is already. Otherwise, chest physiotherapy wise, it's more of a 3 balloon thing what we give, and keep increasing the pressure so that they can have more breathing, so the lung can expand very well. That is the main chest PT what we recommend.
But frankly speaking, we are not having physiotherapists to take care of them as
no.
Because of the because of aerosol transmission and all.
That's
so therefore, this is the very easy way. This is only during the illness also, and when they are diagnosed, they are at home also. It is always to have good breathing exercise, whether it is Anulom Vilom, whatever they want to follow, how much they can do it, but they should do it. Absolutely necessary for peace of mind, mental health, as well as for lungs as well. One more thing with the lungs X-ray and all. Some patients will have bad lungs with the good saturation. What we are doing in those cases, I have almost 2 patients now about to get discharged with saturation of 94, 95 without oxygen since almost 2 days with good control of sugars. But they will be going home because almost 15, 16 days of admission. So probably their lung healing, if it happens completely, probably it will take 6 weeks time. In those cases, we will continue them with the steroids at home also with small dose, but yes, we will continue with them.
One important question asked by all Gujus. Khawanu su.
Guju will answer it.
Okay.
Soup. Hydration is most important.
So what diet do you recommend in a COVID positive patient?
Generally,
or with the family members?
See, generally what happens in COVID positive patient, what we recommend is a very soft, non-oily, non-spicy food. It's more of vitamin C rich food and high protein and low sugar diet. So there will be less carb diet and high protein diet. They should have more of vitamin C in the food, so that we can lime water, or we generally normally give vitamin C supplement as a part of a treatment also, because that has got an antioxidant immunity booster and healing property. Fruits wise, we can tell them to have papaya, we can tell them to have berries and all citrus fruits, and multivitamin generally which contains zinc, because they say zinc has also got more of an anti-oxidative effect, and healing is better. And generally zinc should be given in the dose of 20 milligram, should be in a day requirement, and vitamin C approximately 1 gram in a day. So the generally give 500 milligram BT tablet form. That is it, and generally should be less on carb, more of not much of a sugary, which is the more people, in fact, during the lockdown.
Only proteins.
Everybody is having more of a sugary thing, but generally we tell them to have more of a high protein diet.
High protein. What's the role of vitamin D?
Vitamin D is
all patients, everyone should take it. Yeah.
Everyone should take it, because generally what happens
all patients with fever, suspect COVID up to the discharge, they should take vitamin regular dose. They have to maintain good amount of vitamin D. Among the supplements, the only proved is vitamin C and vitamin D. Nothing else has been, or zinc. These three things have been proved. Otherwise, there is no other rule.
So vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc.
Zinc.
Multivitamins containing zinc.
Zinc.
So those are the accessories that you give along with the regular treatment.
And they say generally have lukewarm water. That is what is recommended by dietitian, just to have little, so that the digestion is good for the digestion point of view.
Okay. What is your opinion about the mental health of the patient? I mean, does that help in him coming out of the illness? What about the mental health of the family people? How do you counsel them?
See, generally the counseling is being done when we generally advise a test. That is the time only we counsel them, not just when we are ordering the test. That is, we have to make them understand it is a mild disease. A patient will be remaining in the hospital and relatives will not be able to visit. So that also gives a lot of anxiety to the family members, and also we generally tell them to chat with them over the phone or speak to them and talk to the relatives. If the patient is inside the house, then it's more easier. They can just call up everybody, do video call or telephone call, be in touch with everyone, do things what they like in the room. If the patient is in the hospital, generally we allow them to talk to the relatives because they cannot come down. So that is the way, if mentally they are stable and the anxiety is less, then things will help in recovery more, because they said more of a stress and anxiety also indirectly increases the hormones, which again will push the patient more for the inflammation and all, and the recovery generally delay when the patient is having a mental health. Relatives are more anxious because they are away from the patient. So as a protocol in the hospital, what we do is that moment we finish taking the round, I update the patient's relatives, what is the today's status and everything, and every duty the RMO changes, they take the round and they update to the patient's relatives, so that the relatives at least get minimum 2 to 3 updates in a day from our side, so that they are not very worried that what is going on, and this patient's relatives are also quarantined, so they also cannot come down to the hospital. So their anxiety is on the both the sides because they are not able to even come down. At the same time, patient feels that nobody's coming and seeing me. So we have to make them understand because they are quarantined, and that's the reason they are not coming. Otherwise, you can talk over the phone and stuff like that. That helps, because many times what happens, the patient is in ICU. The relatives cannot come down. The close relatives or friends, somebody comes over, then they feel there is somebody who's coming and meeting us. Otherwise, if there is no many people coming and meeting, then they feel very left out. So that's the only thing we try to have a stable ward. We try to have little soft music thing, so that they feel little at home sort of a thing. And everybody's been given mobile, so then they use their social network.
Video calls. Video calls to the family members. And probably the relatives are more worried about themselves also. They are quarantined most of the times. They cannot come also. And therefore, they ask everything in detail about the patient as well as from themselves also. Whenever you call them, this is also getting fever, this is getting fever, and you have to really listen to them, because they just do not know what to do, kind of.
Yes, true. Another topic of vaccines is still all query. There is no vaccine available, no thing in sight. So I don't think we should even think about it in the near future.
There is one more medicine which is again after the immunomodulator, which is in pipeline, is Cepsivec. This is basically antibody to Mycobacterium W. Which is,
just say it again. What is it?
It's a killed bacteria. Cepsivec.
Cepsivec.
Cepsivec. It's a intradermal 0.1 ml injection to be given at 3 different sites over 3 days period. So usually this was used in gram-negative bad sepsis cases, but this can be added to all other therapies which are going on. They are conducting trial at PGI Chandigarh.
Yeah.
Soon we will have something on it. Probably people are planning to start it. Basically killed bacteria actually.
Yeah,
it's
and
on
they
the line
say
of
that
vaccine. Yeah.
They say prophylactically the healthcare worker can also try one.
Yeah, can try 0.1 ml.
0.1 ml intradermal. 0.1 ml intradermal for the healthcare worker, if you want to try.
Yeah, but vaccines as of now we do not know.
No.
And how many strains, mutagens have happened, we do not know. So we don't know how much. Only the herd immunity probably would have developed. Probably we'll have an antibody test, and there was some news in between. So many people, 30% of the people have developed antibodies. If they are exposed to the same mutants, probably they will be immune to it.
But again, there are 3 strains of the virus. Right?
That's what I say. If they have been exposed to the same strain, then it is okay. If they're exposed to different strains,
if they are going to get infected by another strain, then
the news has
cross protection. Like if you have been infected by one strain,
we don't know.
We have no.
Again, the news has come is 30% people have come positive for antibodies all over India, whichever centers. But the study they have done in few people in healthcare workers in Nair Hospital, Mumbai, but all of them were negative to the antibodies. So as of now, they have not developed any antibodies. So in Mumbai, we cannot rely on this thing. We have to take full precautions.
And they say that antibody test itself is not as important as the titer. So the titer is still not available. We can only
but again for convalescent plasma, they are using only the treated patients who have antibody positive kind of thing.
Yeah, agreed. But when you have to decide about the antibody as a test, then it is the titer of the IgG which is going to be more important, and not just the presence of IgG. So, but that is still not available. So, yes, so we are a little far away from that. Yes. Okay, to both of you, what message would you like to give family practitioners? I mean, how can they help in the management of COVID patients?
First, you take care of yourself, eat well, maintain good social distancing. Don't be very close to the patient's relative, whatever they feel. Bomb, you are a bomb. I don't want to blast you. You don't want to blast me. Therefore, I'm not touching you. Don't use stethoscope. Please don't examine throat. There is no need to do it. Just ask them. At the most, if they want to show you anything, tell them to take the photographs and show you. Check saturations. Watch for vital signs. Most important is saturation respiratory rate. Just don't relax. People are coming with encephalopathy. People are coming with TB. Patients are coming with myocardial infarction. Anything can be COVID. So these 2-3 things will help us which patient needs hospitalization, how early. Don't rely on patient's reading. If you are not confident, patient can take care of himself at home with home quarantine kind of thing, and the patient is positive, better advise them hospitalization. You do not know at 2 o'clock what will happen, how much will be their heart rate and how much will be saturation, and something will happen, especially with the loose motions also. All patients with loose motion, they feel it's normal enteritis and they turn out to be COVID, and then those are bad. Dehydration, bad diabetes, ketosis, all those complications are going to be trouble. The comorbid, there's no option. With young people also, if you're very sure they're going to monitor, they are going to report you on time, they will have available beds as things are available nowadays. They can stay home, but not to delay them. But all family practitioners, please take care of your mental health, physical health, hygienic condition. That is most important. Patients will keep coming. They are not going to run away. They do not have any options. But if our health is good, we can take care of them well.
Yeah, and whenever they are having the patients in the clinic, generally they should have the digital BP apparatus rather than the stethoscope and the mercury and what we normally use, so that it will be, you know, he doesn't have to be very close to the patient while checking the BP. Put a digital one and just press it so that they can view the reading. That is the way he can maintain his distance from the patient. Second thing, pulse oxygen saturation for all the patients so that he can have this monitoring of the SpO2 and also that try and have more thing. And if they can have a proper when staff or receptions are there, they can always be taught them so that they can write those things on paper so that the patients in time in the clinic with you will be little less. So moment they enter, try and let the nursing staff is there, fine, or receptionist there, they can always use the pulse ox and the digital BP apparatus, note it on a piece of paper and try and get the short history, the certain points already noted down so that the time exposure of yours with the patient is less, so that you know the infectivity and cross contamination is also less. And after each patient was being checked with the BP and the pulse oximeter, just sanitize it.
Okay, I think that was a very informative lecture, and thank you both of you. I think a lot of fundas have got cleared of us, and I hope everybody agrees with me that we really have a little better and clearer view of the corona. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. Take care. Thanks a lot. Thanks for giving us opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as Secretary of KMA, I would just like to make a few announcements that if everybody is comfortable on this platform, we would like to conduct a few more webinars. We would also like to conduct the Yoga Day, 21st June Yoga Day. We would like to celebrate on webinar. And if everybody is comfortable with this platform, please let us know so that we are thinking of planning on 21st June morning Yoga Day on Zoom webinar. So just stay connected and we'll let you know the details. And the final message is SMS. As I can see Dr. H.M. Solanki say, it's his favorite thing. SMS is social distancing, mask and sanitizer. These three form the basis of keeping the corona away. So please, even if the unlockdown has started, don't just go, let go. All these basic three things have to be continued, I think, for another 6 months to a year, because corona is here to stay and we have to modify our way of treating patients, of our lifestyle. Our whole life has changed. Corona has brought about such a change in our life. We have to learn, unlearn different government policies. One day it's different, next day again it is something different. So this is a period of learn, unlearn, learn again. Keep yourself updated, and that is the way we can together fight COVID. Don't be afraid. This is another virus. It has changed our lifestyle, but so had HIV. When HIV came, everybody was so scared. All those who were working without gloves, suddenly in compulsory gloves, blood dikha to aur baapre, was like a horror scene. So how we have changed now, and no, we don't touch patients without gloves. We have changed ourselves, and the way Triple H markers have become the routine tests for all patients. The way HIV was a turning point, I think COVID is also going to be a turning point in our practice. So we will hope that we have some antibody test which will be cheaper and which will give us some screening mechanism, and we can do that for all patients, and we don't have to pay 2,000, 3,000, which is of course less than the 5,000 which was initially charged to the patient. Now the rates have come down to 2,200. So I hope we come across some test which is still cheaper and we can do it on a routine basis, and Let's just change our way of treating patients. Don't be scared. There's nothing to be scared. Just take a lot of care and precautions. That is all I can say. And I really thank everybody for being such a wonderful crowd and for being very cooperative. And I think these webinars will have to continue till September at least, till we are not allowed social distancing, social gatherings not allowed. Till then, I think we will have to continue on webinars. So please look forward to our next CME's information on webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Rohit, one slide which we were supposed to show. I think it's okay. It's okay. It's just a slide of a crowd of people thinking the lion is very, very far away, but the lion is actually right next to you. So beware. Right? Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.